The Bezza was Perodua's very first sedan model, but more than that, it was the very first car to prove that Perodua is more than just a rebadging company. They can make their own designs too. While yes, back then most Perodua models were straight up rebadge versions of various Daihatsu cars, but when it came to sedans, there was no small sedan from Daihatsu for Perodua to copy from. So they had to make their own, and they did. But of course, there will always be a lot of haters saying that this is just a rebadge Toyota Etios. Even the new Myvi, some people were saying it's a rebadge Corolla IM. Both of that are not true, obviously. They are both original Perodua designs. Since 2016, over 185,000 units of the Bezza have been sold in Malaysia. And believe it or not, this is now the best-selling sub-1 litre sedan in Sri Lanka. I know, right? Who would have thought? In any way, for 2020, Perodua has given it a proper facelift with upgraded looks, specs, safety, comfort, and even handling. So let's see if this is still the entry-level sedan you should all buy. We'll tell you what's good, what's bad, what's new, what's old, how it compares against the Proton Saga, and of course, if you were to decide to buy one, which variant should you go for, the 1 litre or the 1.3? So let's find out in this video. Let's go. Well, actually, no, I'll just tell you right now, don't bother the 1 litre, just go straight for the 1.3. You'll thank me later. All right, let's start. Let's start with the prices and variants first. The range starts with the 1.0G manual going for 34,500 ringgit, going up to 36,500 ringgit for the 1.0G automatic that we have here. These base models got silver instead of chrome front grille, no fog lamps, and smaller 14-inch wheels taken from the Myvi 1.3. The good news is all model now gets the wing mirror mounted signal indicator, so there's no more ugly bulbs on the front fenders. What's not so good is the body colored B pillars over there, which is a clear downgrade from the old car. It just makes the entire thing look so cheap. Now what's really not good is the lack of extra new features in terms of safety beyond just the standard 2 airbags and ABS. There's still no electronic stability control, which we've been saying for years now, which is an absolute must-have for modern cars. In the Asia range, there's the 1 litre G Extra version that adds on ESP for an additional 1,500 ringgit. So I'm wondering why they can't just do the same for the Bezza and price it at 38,000 ringgit. Now that would still make it cheaper than the only Saga variant with ESP, the premium at 40,000 ringgit. That would make sense, right? Thankfully, ESP is now fitted to all 1.3 litre models instead of just the AV like before, so that's definitely good. What's less good news is the deletion of the 1.3 litre manual variant, which Perodua says had such low demand that it just didn't make sense anymore for them to continue making. So what we have is the 1.3X for 44,000 ringgit and the range-topping 1.3 AV that we have over here for 50,000 ringgit. On top of the bigger engine, you also get back the chrome front grille, the fog lamps, front corner sensors, and these brand new, bigger 15-inch dual-tone alloys. You also get back keyless entry and, thank God, blacked out B-pillars. Just as important is the inclusion of Windows Solar and security tinting on the 1.3 litre models. The 6,000 ringgit extra for the 1.3 AV adds on leather steering wheel and seats, plus a touchscreen unit with a reverse camera. But what's more important is this, the inclusion of Advanced Safety Assist or ASA 2.0. This is Perodua's latest active safety suite, even more advanced than what's fitted on the Myvi, the ASA 1.0. Among other things, this adds on autonomous emergency braking or AEB, which can be absolutely crucial to avoid minor crashes or even minimize the damage of more serious accidents. It can now warn you of oncoming objects at up to 100 kilometers per hour, autonomously brake for you at up to 80 kilometers per hour, and even detect pedestrians in front of a car at up to 50 kilometers per hour. It's properly advanced stuff, and it's fantastic that it's fitted on an entry-level car like this Bezza here. This is the cheapest sedan to have AEB in Malaysia, and in fact there are a lot more expensive cars that don't have it in our market. We're talking about BMWs, Minis, Audis, Jaguars, Land Rovers, and even Porsches that cost more than 10 times more than this car. So well done, Perodua. Thank you very much. Credit where it's due. But having said that, 50,000 ringgit is a lot of money to pay for an entry-level car such as this, no matter how you look at it. Its closest rival, the Proton Saga, tops out at only 40,000 ringgit. And I know what you're gonna say, this car has better fuel economy, so you'll save more money in the long run, right? But you know how much fuel you can buy with 10,000 ringgit? At today's prices, that's over 4,800 liters of fuel. Assuming you refuel every week, that's more than 3 years worth of fuel that you're paying up front. And at 50,000 ringgit, you can also buy the bigger, more powerful Proton Persona 1.6. And even within Perodua's range itself, it's not far off the Myvi 1.5 AV. So yeah, for all intents and purposes, the Bezza may be an affordable car, but let's not call it cheap, shall we? Because it's not. But enough of all that, let's take a look at what's new on this 2020 facelift. The old Bezza's big and ugly reflector headlamps have been banished, replaced by their slim LED units. Now these look a lot closer to those on the original Perodua Bezza concept from 10 years ago, and I think it transforms the whole look of the Bezza. The old car looked a little bit too smiley, a little bit too boring, whereas this car has all gone aggressive and sporty. Remember, the latest Saga still runs the basic reflector halogen headlamp, so this is 2-3 steps ahead in terms of technology. But then again, this does not have LED DRLs, which the Saga now has, so tit for tat, I guess. It also gets brand new bumpers all around, which I do think look good, but perhaps a little bit too aggressive for what is supposed to be a family car or a Grab car, you know what I mean? Ni dah nampak macam Bezza SE or GT dah ni. But for sure, the makeover is a lot more successful up front compared to the rear half. This facelift slaps on this big rear bumper in an attempt to hide the Bezza's infamous tonggate looks, and I'm not quite sure if it has worked. I mean, from here I think it looks too bulky, too narrow, too tall for a small car like this. The old car, I think, was a more cleaner look for the Bezza. And then there's this somewhat random looking big exhaust hole down there, which I don't understand because the actual pipe is actually really small underneath. But then again, it's not all bad because I do like the look of this new two-tone rear garnish and the side skirts, and the new garnet red color for the 1.3 litre models does look pretty sweet. Fun fact, the big rear bumper makes this car 20mm longer than before, and the 15-inch wheels and bigger tyres make it taller than before as well by 15mm. But what hasn't changed, however, is this car's awkward proportions. It's just a weird looking sedan, and in comparison, the Proton Saga has a much more traditional sedan profile. There are two reasons for this, of course. Number one, this is Perodua's very first sedan design, and I suppose it kind of shows. Number two, this is based on the Perodua Asia platform, which is a short, tall and kind of narrow hatchback that is not an ideal base to design a sedan from. Now, before you start saying that it's just, Perodua designers not being very good, remember we've seen a whole lot of weirdly shaped sedans from hatchbacks from all sorts of car brands. The Proton Persona first comes to mind, of course, but let's not forget the Kia Rio, the Ford Fiesta, Mazda 2, Nissan Almera, Peugeot 207, the list goes on and on. Moving on inside, the 2020 facelift is a lot less apparent in here. The biggest change is this big centerpiece, now with this silver trim around the center console. This replaces the big gloss black finish in the old car. In a way, it does look a little bit less classy than before, but it does add a little bit of layering to the overall design, and the side vents don't look as tacky as before without the contrast rings. Plus, it's also a lot less reflective now, so it should collect less fingerprints, scratches, and dust over time. Perodua has also made this standard across the range, so even if you buy the base car, at least your dashboard won't look so cheap. In the old Bezza, the basic all grey dashboard was nasty. There's also a brand new instrument cluster now with more intricate white crystal rings going around the dials. But what is a pity though, they've taken out the orange rings around it, which I did find to be cool, but I guess some people thought it was a bit distracting. Also new is a gear lever taken from the latest Myvi. This has soft plastics at the top and a lot less sharp edges around the gear lever compared to the old design, so this is definitely a good change. This touchscreen unit for the AV is also new, the same as in the latest Asia, but to be honest, I'm not a big fan of it because the interface doesn't look very good, the touchscreen is not very responsive, there's no physical volume buttons, and the reverse camera feed can be quite blurry. But what's worse than that is that this England isn't very good. Like in other cars, you have a button for settings. In this car, there's a button for setting. Satu je, setting. But at least the screen is not as distractingly reflective like it is on the Saga, so there's that. The other three models got the standard head unit, which works and looks just fine, and thankfully Bluetooth is standard across the range. In the Asia, you need to get the Asia SE or the AV to get Bluetooth. In 2020, I think that's a bit stingy. The rest of the cabin is pretty much the same as before, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. This is still a very spacious and well put together cabin, and fit and finish is very decent because this is, after all, an entry-level car. There's no misaligned parts, there's no sharp edges, and the knobs here work cleanly enough. And I'm sure we've all been in enough Bezza grab cars to notice that they all hold up quite well through the years. But if you were to nitpick, then you would find a few flaws, like this small air pockets within the steering wheel leather, the slightly tight aircon vent adjuster, and the color of this passenger airbag cover, which is not quite consistent with the rest of the cabin. But then again, since this is an entry-level car, like I said, I'll let those slide. One major complaint for the Bezza is the non-adjustable steering wheel, and it's the same again here. But then again, to be honest, from where I'm sitting, it's not really a problem for me. I think the height is just fine, and I can look at the meters perfectly fine. In fact, the Proton Saga may have an adjustable steering wheel, but even at its highest settings, it's still a bit too low for my liking, and it even blocks the top of the meters by a little bit. Personally, I would prefer this fixed steering wheel over an adjustable but overall worse driving position in the Saga. Another thing, the seats are on the small side, but then again, these so-called semi-bucket front seats, I know I didn't name them, they do feel a lot more comfortable, so much more supportive than the flat seats in the 1-litre models. The one thing I wish this car would have is the toll reader from the Myvi and the Aros. Now that, I think, would have been a great addition for the Bezza, but it's not here. Another big complaint for the Perodua Bezza is the rear seat backrest being a little bit too upright, not so comfortable for long journeys, and I completely agree. I still don't think it's quite as bad as what people exaggerate it to be, but it sure wasn't ideal. Now Perodua has finally admitted it was wrong and adjusted the backrest from 23 degrees to now 27 degrees of recline. And the effect, it doesn't sound like much, but the effect is actually remarkable. It's a big improvement. They've done this by moving the base of the seat slightly forward and reclining the backrest just a tiny bit more. But the good news is, they've done this with a minimal effect on legroom. Perodua says there's just 20mm less legroom here compared to before. That's like this much. You won't miss it. So the Bezza still has a super spacious rear cabin, miles better than what the Saga offers. Headroom is alright, legroom is massive, and I know I'm not the tallest person around at 167 cm, but my 180 cm BM colleague Hafriz fits in just fine too. The thing is, I still think that the Saga's rear seat is slightly more comfortable. Somehow the cushion is better shaped and softer, a lot more supportive. So again, it's a mixed bag. The Bezza is definitely more spacious, but the Saga is slightly more comfortable. So choosing between the two, it's between space and comfort. For me, I think, you know, I'm not the tallest person around, so again, space is not such a big issue for me, you know. Other than that, it's the usual Perodua Bezza affair. It's quite narrow back here, so you'll just about fit 3 adults in the back. Down here, you've got 2 pairs of ISOFIX mounts. Remember, they are now compulsory this year. And beyond that, you've also got these 2 teh tarik hooks, plus an anti-snatch handbag hook for ladies. There's also a USB charging socket down there, even though there's no rear aircon vents. But then again, this is such a small car, so that is not an issue. The front aircon will surely cool down this car pretty quickly. And next we get to the Bezza's party piece. Its humongous boot. At 508 litres, it's over 20% bigger than what the Saga offers, and it's more than big enough for all your luggage needs for your balik kampung trips and whatnot. There's even an underfloor storage compartment for your smaller items and a full-size spare tyre just in case. So that's the standard cars, but if you want, you can also dress it up even more with the optional gear up accessories. There's an all-around body kit package that looks super aggressive, even though the LED lights on the front chin may look like DRLs, but they are just light guides for whatever reason. The list goes on and include leather seat covers, center armrests, LED scuff plates, floor lighting, and more. In fact, the catalogue is so big that if you select everything on it, you'd be adding more than 5,000 ringgit to your sticker price, so do choose wisely. What you should absolutely not do, however, is pick the base car and then add on thousands and thousands worth of accessories on top of it. Tolonglah jangan buat macam tu. Because remember, while you can always add on accessories and body kits later on, you cannot add on safety features. You can't, for instance, go to a brother's shop and ask, "Abang, tambah satu ESP, tambah satu ASA." It just doesn't work that way. So always buy the best variant you can afford at the start, even before you start looking into the accessories. So with all that said and done, let's go drive these things finally. I'm starting off with the 1 litre variant first, which you can probably tell by the wail of that engine. Up front is a 1 litre 3-cylinder engine with VVTi, making 67 horsepower and 91 Newton meters of torque. All that goes to the front wheels, pulling just under 900 kilograms of weight. Well, actually it's closer to 1,000 kilograms with me in it. But my point is, even though this car may not have so much power, it is a very light car, so it's not underpowered. It's not quick by any means, but it's not too bad, it's decent. And you know, even going up hills, it doesn't struggle as much as you may think. It's not effortless by any means, but I think it's okay. For a city car, for a point A to point B car, it's not so bad. Even on the highways, it can pull comfortably enough to the national speed limits without breaking a sweat. So objectively, you don't really need the 1.3 litre engine over the 1 litre engine based on performance alone. But tell you what, you would want the 1.3 litre engine because of its added refinement. This being a 3-cylinder engine, it's a very rattly, very loud and very unrefined engine, as you can hear right there. And you don't even have to drive it hard. Even when you just put it into gear, you can start feeling this car's vibrations through the pedals, the steering wheel, the seats, everything. This is just an unrefined automobile. It's not so much wrong with the car itself, of course, because it's more the engine. By having just 3 cylinders, it is inherently unbalanced, because you see, on a normal 4-cylinder engine, you can have 2 pistons going up and 2 going down, so they cancel each other out. With just 3 pistons, however, you just can't balance things out. It is naturally unbalanced. It is going to vibrate. It is just physics. You can, of course, add on balancer shafts and dynamic engine mounts and whatnot to make it more refined. But remember, this is an entry-level car, so Perodua and Daihatsu is not going to do all that. It is what it is. So the only reason you would want this car is because of its better fuel economy. Perodua says you can get around 20 kilometers per litre with this car, but in the real world you're looking at around 15 to 17 kilometers per litre based on how you drive. And that is better than the 1.3. You can get about 15 kilometers per litre in that one, and the Saga is even worse still. You can get around, say, 13 kilometers per litre on everyday normal driving. So this has an advantage in terms of fuel economy, but you do give up a lot in terms of refinement, and that is something that you feel day in and day out. Gets quite tiring, I think. And don't forget, all the Sagas, even the base ones that are cheaper than this 1 litre model, run a 4-cylinder 1.3 litre engines. So I think it's really hard to recommend the Bezza 1.0 because, you know, if your budget really is that tight, just under 35,000 ringgit, I think you're better off in the 4-cylinder Saga. Even if you insist on having a Perodua, I would still recommend an Asia 1.0G. At least that car for the same price, you get electronic stability control, which may save your life in the future. Or, you know, better yet, save up until you can get a Bezza 1.3 because that is a much better car. So this is now the Perodua Bezza 1.3, which I think is the proper Bezza that you should buy. Up front is a 4-cylinder 1.3 litre engine with dual VVTi, and here it makes 94 horsepower and 121 Newton meters of torque. The extra 30 horsepower and Newton meter over the 1 litre, well, it's all there for sure, but it's not that apparent unless you really call for full throttle. In normal driving, it's, you know, it's just as good. It's slightly more effortless in a way, but I would not say this is significantly faster or you would necessarily need the performance of the 1.3 litre engine. But what you would definitely feel more is the improved refinement of this car. This is so much better in every single sense. It revs much more smoothly, it's a lot quieter, there's a lot less vibrations, there's pretty much no vibrations to be felt actually. It is a night and day difference. It also helps that all 1.3 litre models get ESPS standard. So like I said before and many times over in this video, if you're going to buy the Bezza, look at the 1.3, not the 1 litre. The transmission is a 4-speed automatic, which Perodua has been using for, you know, what feels like forever now, right? But then again, it works well, so why fix something that's not broken? The shifts are decent enough. You can feel the shift shocks once in a while, but then again, this is still fairly responsive and quick enough to respond to your inputs, like say you want to overtake one car or two. In a way, this is a lot more responsive compared to the older Proton CVTs. But having said that, the Proton Saga's new 480 is still slightly smoother and a bit more refined in terms of its gear changes and its shift logic. So yeah, it's not the best gearbox out there, but I've got no complaints really. For entry-level car, it does its job really well. So overall, I will say that the gearbox is competent enough for most people. I say most people because there will still be some people who would complain that this car does not have a sport mode for, you know, a more engaging drive. Well, if that's what you're after, well, I think you're barking up the wrong tree, buddy. This is not the car you're looking for. Because as much as Perodua has tried to make this car more dynamic than ever, it still falls far short of the Proton Saga. The steering is still a little bit too light. It feels a bit twitchy on the highways. so you don't get that full confidence behind the wheel when you're going fast on a highway. By fast, I mean just around 90 to 100 kilometers per hour. Even by then, I already feel myself keep, adjusting the steering angle to keep within the lane, because it's just too light, it's just too twitchy. You find yourself drifting away from your lane if you don't really pay attention. That's not to say you should not pay attention at all times, but in this car you have to 100% of the time, and on a highway, on long journeys, that can be quite tiring very, very quickly. Worse still is when there's a faster car, or God forbid a big tanker that overtakes you, right? You can feel the steering wheel being pulled because of the wind and pressure and whatnot. That can get quite unnerving. You will learn to start gripping the steering wheel a little bit tighter once you see any big cars coming. But in terms of stability, this car is slightly improved compared to the old car. You do feel slightly more planted, more assured behind the steering wheel. I think if you drive this car against the old car back to back, you will see quite a big difference. So it's not quite there yet together with the Saga, but at least we now know Perodua is heading in the right direction. This car's steering is actually not too bad because it does load up nicely through the corners. Handling wise, I would describe this car to be safe, dependable and competent. It's not a lot of fun, but it will do whatever you want it to do. The steering wheel is actually much better through corners rather than in the straights, because it does load up quite nicely when you turn. There's enough weight, there's enough heft, enough feel from the wheel to give you back a little bit of that confidence you've lost when going on the straights. The change to a bigger 15-inch wheels plus lower profile tires obviously have an effect on this as well. But another thing it has affected is in terms of its turning circles, because like in the Asia style, the cars with bigger 15-inch wheels have a slightly wider turning circle. It's not that big of a difference. The Bezza 1 litre has a turning radius of 4.5 meters, whereas the Bezza 1.3 has a turning radius of 5 meters. So this car will still be very, very easy and very maneuverable through the city center and through parking lots. If you do ever find yourself making a 3-point turn while trying to make a U-turn in this car, well, you're likely to be making a tight, illegal U-turn anyway, so don't blame the car for that. One department where this car has a clear edge over the Saga is in terms of the brakes, because this has a very good, very linear feel to the brake pedal. It's very easy to modulate, whereas the Saga, you have to go through a long did travel for the pedal before it actually starts gripping. So yeah, there is quite a few things that this car is better than the Saga. Now lastly, ride and refinement. In terms of ride comfort, this car is just about average, I think. It doesn't have that nasty, brittle and underdamped feel mostly associated with cheap cars. So this car has a rather well-damped suspension system, but then again, it deals better with smaller bumps rather than big bumps because of this car's very narrow tracks and short wheelbase. It just doesn't bode well with bigger bumps. As for refinement, well, there's just an assortment of noises in here. There's the engine noise, less so in the 1.3 rather than the 1 litre, but it's still there. There's also a lot of tire roar, a lot of wind noise at speed. So refinement, I would still think this is below average. In terms of ride and refinement, I think it's the Saga again that has a clear upper hand. Actually, even within Perodua's own range, the Myvi feels far more superior and more sophisticated in terms of its driving dynamics compared to this Bezza over here. I think its latest version in 2018 has just moved the bars so far ahead, so far forward against the rest of the Perodua range, that it has left the Asia and the Bezza so far behind in terms of driving dynamics. I think, yeah, this car has a lot to catch up on, to learn from the new Myvi. But everything considered, it's very clear from driving this car that Perodua was very much focused on improving the few things that a lot of people were complaining about in the old car, like this car's looks and the rear seat. So I guess not many people were complaining about this car's handling, which, if you look at it, is probably quite true. Most Bezza owners recently are typically, commuters day in and day out, and perhaps Grab drivers. They're definitely not driving enthusiasts. Look at it that way, and I think Perodua has definitely made the right choices here. Fix the glaring flaws, while the rest, well, that can wait. So overall, the 2020 Perodua Bezza facelift is very much a mixed bag. This car showroom appeal is fantastic, I'll give it that, and the upgrades bring about proper improvements in terms of safety, comfort, looks, and even handling. But ultimately, for a car to be driven, this is still very much a compromise experience. There's still a lot of flaws left unfixed. So it's far from perfect, but then again, no car in this segment is perfect. To make a perfect car in here, you want a combination of the Saga's price, the Bezza's aggressive looks, the Saga's more balanced proportions, the Bezza's better practicality, the Saga's ride and handling, the Bezza's fuel economy, the Saga's refinement, and the Bezza's safety. But obviously, no such car exists. So maybe Malaysia's third national car can do that? But back to reality, choosing between the Perodua Bezza and the Proton Saga very much depends on your own personal priorities and preferences. If, for instance, you just want a car to get you from point A to point B, or maybe even a Grab car, or a car to get you to college and whatnot, I would fully recommend the Perodua Bezza, the 1.3 obviously, not the 1 litre. But on the other hand, if your budget is a little bit tighter and you're very particular in what you think your car should feel dynamically, then perhaps you should look at the Proton Saga first. Or if you don't really need a rear boot, perhaps even the Perodua Myvi. I, for one, am super glad that I don't have to make this decision for myself right here, right now. But over on to you, which one would you choose and why? Let me know in the comment section below, and thank you for watching.